I instructed the executives of the subsidiary to move the headquarters and the research center. Naturally, there was fierce opposition. Our key personnel might leave. The Silicon Valley area is notorious for high housing prices and a high cost of living, even within California. Still, companies establish themselves there because numerous IT firms, startups, and the world's top talents are already gathered. There's no place that can replace Silicon Valley in terms of connections and collaboration with other companies or the supply of high-level talent. Moreover, those working in Silicon Valley do not wish to leave for other regions. This is why Kairos left its headquarters in Detroit while keeping the research center. What on earth is the reason? I shared Professor Mohan's argument and did my best to persuade them, while also applying pressure. I'm merely the largest shareholder of the subsidiaries, not a manager. However, I have the authority to convene a shareholder meeting and dismiss them if they refuse to listen to me. The relocation must be completed within a month. Everyone reacted as if I were crazy, but they had no choice but to comply. Fortunately, these companies started as startups and focus primarily on IT and services, making the relocation far easier than moving a factory. We finalized a new site and arranged for vibration-free vehicles to transport essential equipment. Once the relocation plan was confirmed, some employees submitted their resignations. Among them were several key personnel such as coding specialists, programmers, and engineers. Instead of letting those who resigned leave immediately, we decided to give them 3 months of vacation. During that time, if they changed their minds, they could return anytime. If they didn't change their minds, we promised to calculate their 3 months of pay as paid leave, and then accept their resignation. While handling these matters, I met Peter Kitsuyo, the CEO of Arcite. He was a Japanese-British national but wasn't proficient in Japanese. Instead, he spoke with a perfect British accent. It's been a while. Nice to see you. It really has been a long time. Arcite is based in the UK and operates primarily in Europe. Unlike the US, there aren't many opportunities to go that way. I mentioned the San Francisco earthquake and told him, I don't know how likely it is, but the recovery efforts will lead to a complete redesign of the city. I hope you can prepare the related work in advance. Considering the scale of the recovery, it would be a massive project involving construction companies from around the world. In architecture, everything is determined at the design stage from materials to construction methods. The construction company that wins the bid merely follows the design. If Arcite could outline the blueprint for urban reconstruction, it would give them the power to influence all the participating construction companies in the recovery. Peter looked troubled. We are already short-staffed with the current projects. Moreover, urban design is usually a big task, and it's unreasonable to allocate time and manpower to such work based merely on a possibility. I said to him, as the representative of OTK Company, I'm not giving orders. I'm making a request as a client. If the plan is scrapped or halted, OTK Company will cover the costs. This is a very significant and necessary undertaking. Arcite won't suffer any losses either way. Near Gangnam Station, 4 high-rise buildings adorned with blue glass form a complex known as Samsung Town. The office of Chairman Im Jin-young is located in Building D of Samsung Town, where key subsidiaries of the Samsung Group, including Samsung Electronics, are gathered. As I got out of the car, an employee who had been waiting showed me to the chairman's office. The elevator stopped at the 45th floor. Upon entering with the secretary's guidance, Chairman Im Jin-young rose from his seat in front of the desk. Thank you for making the trip. Well, it's just nearby. It took less than 5 minutes by car. Although I had met Chairman Im Jin-young several times, this was my first visit to this place. The interior was neat and without any clutter. Only the necessary furniture was placed in the spacious room. Through the window, Samsung Town was visible in its entirety. Samsung Town was created by the late Chairman Im Il-kwon, and he conducted his business here. Thinking about it made me feel strangely intrigued. Despite various issues like political connections, union suppression, and tax evasion, no one can deny that the late Chairman Im Il-kwon was an outstanding manager. Thus, when he collapsed and the regime of Chairman Im Jin-young began, shareholders expressed concern. Although he had undergone long-term successor training, his management abilities had yet to be proven. However, contrary to public concerns, many now see his leadership as a success. The stock price is steadily rising. Of course, This isn't solely due to Chairman Im Jin-young's abilities but rather thanks to timely investments made by his predecessor. The task of pioneering new industries is one given to the third-generation managers. Fortunately, the ambitious advancement in the electric vehicle sector is beginning to show results, supported by Warren Buffett. Berkshire Hathaway has continued purchasing shares of Samsung Electronics and Samsung SB even after block deals. Is coffee all right for you? Yes. We sat down and the secretary brought in the coffee. Did you check on the request I made back then? Yes. But why are you curious about the release date of the iPhone Z? I casually made an excuse. There are subsidiary companies developing related apps. We are also planning an event aligned with the iPhone Z release date. Chairman Im Jin-young had no suspicions about my words. The release date for the first launch countries, including the US, has been set for September 28th. Korea is included in the second launch group, scheduled for mid-October, but the exact date hasn't been determined yet. I see. If it's the 28th, that buys us some time. Given the current situation, even a few days are precious. A moment of awkward silence passed while we sipped our coffee. After a while, Chairman Im Jin-young broke the silence. I heard you're sponsoring the research of Professor Mohan from Caltech. Yes. And I also heard that OTK Company is buying raw materials and disaster supplies, and moving its subsidiaries from Silicon Valley. That's correct. While gold and oil have a high trading volume and wouldn't greatly affect markets, copper and aluminum, among other non-ferrous metals, have seen significant price increases since we started purchasing them. Of all the non-ferrous metals, we're focusing most on copper. The reason is its high conductivity, making it essential for electrical wiring. A tremendous amount of copper will be needed to rebuild the power grid in the future. I was just about to bring that up. The labs of the subsidiaries of the Samsung Group, including Samsung Electronics, are gathered in the San Jose area of Silicon Valley. I recommend relocating as soon as possible. While the data is backed up on servers, make sure to move important equipment in advance and expedite the selection of alternative sites. Once other companies start relocating, prices will skyrocket. Chairman Im Jin-young, hesitating for a moment, spoke cautiously. I think you may be falling into excessive fear. I'd suggest taking a break and listening to the opinions of those around you. This is probably what common sense is all about. Who would think I have foresight just because I'm preparing for an earthquake? They'd probably just think I'm overreacting and gripped by fear alone. Chairman Im Jin-young said with a worried expression. How about getting some counseling? I don't mean this in a bad way. I regularly consult a psychiatrist for psychological therapy myself, and other CEOs do the same. Being a chairman of a large corporation may make people envious, but in reality the mental stress is considerable. There's worry over declining sales, falling stock prices, and public opinion. Additionally, one has to consider investigations by the Fair Trade Commission, tax audits, and in South Korea, occasionally the worry of going to prison. In many ways it's a high-stress job. You fell during the San Francisco earthquake last time and couldn't wake up for a while. It's perfectly normal to develop a fear after experiencing an earthquake. It's important to accept that fact as it is. It's not just me, the public feels the same way. Like those who experience PTSD from war or disasters, I am also trapped by trauma from the earthquake. Well, if they see it this way, it's easier for me. Chairman Im Jin-young said apologetically, I'm sorry if this sounded too intrusive. No, thank you for your concern. OTK Company and Samsung Group are collaborators, not competitors. So, perhaps that's why they worry too. More importantly, I'd like to talk about work today. What's on your mind? I want to buy some batteries. The foundation of modern civilization is electricity. By September, I won't have to worry much about the cold, but losing electricity at the shelter is a major issue. I need to charge my phone and electronic devices, and I need lighting at night. The government will prioritize restoring power, but we need electricity until then. Samsung SB has been excluded from the Chinese government's battery subsidy program, and its current factory utilization rate remains below 70%. We should be able to manage the order volume. I will also order GPS and wireless communication equipment. There's not much time, so I hope production can start as soon as possible. Please send the produced quantity directly to California by air. Hearing this, Chairman Im Jin-young sighed softly with a lonely expression. Are you truly convinced by that professor's words? It's not so much the Professor Mohan's words I trust, but the vision I've seen. Well, what do you think, Senior? I know that the San Francisco area has a high probability of earthquakes. However, your concerns seem excessive. If we act on a seismology professor's single statement and nothing happens, OTK company will become a laughingstock. To be precise, it's already on its way to becoming a laughingstock. Depending on the CEO's judgment, a thriving company can collapse, or a failing company can be revived. But what happens to a company if the CEO cannot make sound decisions due to PTSD? Whether you believe me or not is irrelevant. I don't intend to convince you of my perspective here. The important thing is the contract. What will you do? What if I refuse? Then I'll have to approach CL Electronics and CL Chemicals. There are many companies that produce batteries and electronic products. Despite saying this, there's no other company as suitable for mass production in such a short period as Samsung Electronics. It's the most vertically integrated among global IT manufacturers. Anvil handles only the design of hardware products, while outsourcing parts production and assembly. Samsung Electronics manages design, parts production and assembly all in-house. Thus, it can process orders swiftly. Chairman Im Jin-young seemed to be deep in thought, leaning back on the sofa. A manager must prioritize the company's profits. When someone offers to pay for products, how could one judge if they are sane or not? After a long pause, Im Jin-young spoke with a bitter expression. How much quantity is needed? I answered briefly. Quite a lot. The reputation of Kong Jin, who has risen day by day due to advancements in autonomous driving technology and the development of new battery materials. However, recently he displayed some puzzling behaviors. He has been sponsoring research at Caltech's seismology department, investing in raw materials and purchasing disaster relief supplies, among other things. As subsidiaries in Silicon Valley began relocating, people started to understand what Kong Jin-hu was thinking. It was preparation for earthquakes. Once this fact became known, the big one is coming quickly sold out at both online and offline bookstores. Attempts to secure additional copies were futile, as the publisher had already gone bankrupt. Unfortunately, there was no electronic version available, and once stock ran out, there was no way to obtain the book. Professor Mohan's research lab had around 300 copies in stock. Local bookstore employees drove pickup trucks to collect boxes filled with the books. They sold out as soon as they were displayed. The largest online bookstore in the US, AMZ, contacted Professor Mohan to explore the possibility of an e-book publication. Upon receiving the manuscript, they finished editing and started selling the e-book within 3 days. Once released as an e-book, the big one is coming, soared to first place, surpassing various bestsellers. Media outlets even dug up Professor Mohan's past papers, inundating the press with articles. Professor Kiran Mohan claims a major earthquake will occur in the San Francisco area within months. Warning of a disaster worse than the Alaska earthquake and the Great East Japan earthquake. Will San Francisco relive the nightmares of 1906 and 1989? Is the big one really coming? Is this excessive concern or reasonable skepticism? The San Francisco Bay Area, along with the whole state of California, began to buzz with fear of a massive earthquake. As anxiety spread like an epidemic, renowned seismologists stepped forward. Josh Brown, a leading authority in seismology and a professor at MIT, refuted Professor Mohan's claims point by point in a media interview. He argued that instead of objectively analyzing data to draw conclusions, Mohan selectively presented data to fit conclusions. Professor Brown stated, "The San Andreas Fault is only 800 miles long and is a strike-slip fault. Moreover, since it is a transform boundary, even in the worst-case scenario, the occurrence of a magnitude 8 or greater earthquake is impossible. The probability of that happening within the next 10 years is less than 5%. The California state government also stepped in to ease the situation. Democratic Governor Franklin Levin issued an official statement. The California state government has all manuals for observing earthquakes, early warnings and responses. According to the U.S. Geological Survey (USGS), the possibility of a big one is close to zero, and no risks have been detected so far, so please rest assured." Thanks to the prompt response, the spread of anxiety began to subside. Residents were inclined to simply observe the unfolding situation. However, one question still lingered. If the likelihood of a big one is low, why do aftershocks provoke such behavior? The media offered answers to that. OTK company invests in raw materials using corporate bond issuance. Even selling now could yield billions in profits. Typical tactics of a vulture fund looking to profit from spreading anxiety. Is it due to PTSD or a massive scam? Is there a possibility of violating federal law? Until recently, Professor Kiran Mohan was in despair. He published a book warning about the dangers of the big one. He thought this book would resonate widely and spark active discussions on countermeasures, but the outcome was entirely the opposite. The book didn't even sell out its first edition and the publishing house went bankrupt. In academia, his arguments were completely ignored. That was tolerable, but the real problem was the cessation of government research grants. He felt anxious and tense, aware that time was running out. The big one was approaching. Before that, he needed to find evidence to support his claims and inform the public. Amidst this, a world-renowned investor and immensely wealthy individual approached him. Kong Jin, who volunteered to be a sponsor, telling him not to worry about money in the future, allowing Professor Mohan to resume his research with renewed motivation. California Institute of Technology houses one of the world's leading seismology centers. Here, various earthquakes across the United States are observed, and data is collected, exchanging information in real time with other centers globally. After the Great East Japan earthquake, the sense of crisis regarding earthquakes heightened in the U.S., leading the federal government to fund increased monitoring equipment along the Pacific coast and the establishment of early warning systems. The aim was to quickly identify the epicenter and magnitude of earthquakes, alerting and evacuating residents in advance. As the system began operating, a flood of data poured in, accessible to anyone with approval. However, having the same materials does not guarantee identical dishes. Similarly, providing the same data does not yield the same conclusions. The interpretation and analysis fall to individual scholars, meaning different perspectives can lead to vastly different results. Data that is too sparse can be problematic, but an overload presents its own analytical challenges. As existing data was supplemented with new data, the academic community reacted with confusion. It would take time to establish a clear system. Professor Mohan meticulously analyzed earthquakes that occurred in the Pacific Ring of Fire following the Great East Japan earthquake, including even the subtle tremors that could easily be overlooked. With each passing day, his anxiety grew. Meanwhile, the public buzzed around Professor Mohan's assertions. The previously unsold books sold out and media interview requests flooded in. Alongside this, waves of emails and letters containing criticism and condemnation poured in. By nature, Professor Mohan did not care much about others' perceptions. This allowed him to continue advocating views contrary to mainstream academic opinions. No matter what others say, one simply does what they need to do. Professor Mohan recalled his grandmother's words. Perhaps due to her lineage as a family of shamans, she shared various stories about the land, sea, and sky. Surprisingly, all of it turned out to be true. When she said a strong wind would come from the west, a typhoon hit Boston. When she mentioned heavy rain from the south, New Orleans flooded. To her amazed grandson, she said it was just a coincidence. But was it really just a coincidence? Countless earthquakes have occurred throughout the history of indigenous people, and those stories have been passed down orally to future generations. His grandmother advised him to flee as earthquakes would cause land to crack, buildings to collapse, and waters to surge. Those words lingered in his mind long after her passing. No one denies the possibility of an earthquake at the San Andreas Fault. However, the prevailing belief is that it won't lead to a major quake. When it comes to faults near San Francisco, almost everyone thinks of the San Andreas Fault. The previous two major earthquakes were caused by it. Yet, in reality, there is another fault. That is the Hayward Fault. To the left of San Francisco Bay is the San Andreas Fault. To the right is the Hayward Fault. Professor Mohan raised the possibility that the extent of the Hayward Fault had expanded 2 years ago. He claimed it extended from the northern part of San Francisco Bay through Berkeley and Oakland down to San Jose. However, since he had been treated as a pariah in academia, even this idea was dismissed. While reviewing data from newly activated observation equipment, Professor Mohan had a realization. Wait a minute. He quickly unfolded a map of California and drew two faults with a marker. Two long vertical lines were drawn on either side of San Francisco. This time he drew a horizontal line connecting the two faults. That line accurately pierced through San Francisco. If the range of the Hayward Fault has expanded, the distance between the two faults narrows within 20 kilometers. There's enough possibility for them to directly influence each other. Unlike the San Andreas Fault, which continues to produce earthquakes, the Hayward Fault has been relatively quiet. But what if the earthquake cycles align? What if both faults trigger strike-slip motion simultaneously? Professor Mohan quickly analyzed the data to overlap the cycles of the two faults. Amazingly, the times when they align is approximately 50 days later. In other words, late September of this year. Professor Mohan felt cold sweat trickle down his back. Oh my God. He had previously felt 90% sure about the possibility of a major earthquake. Now that thought had shifted to 99%. He couldn't gauge the extent of its power. I need to run the simulation first. While he was in shock, Carrie spoke up. Please take this call, Professor. I'm busy right now, tell them to call back later. It's an important call. You have to take it. Professor Mohan turned his head. Who is it? It's CO Kong Jin-ho. No matter how busy he was, a call from someone funding the project was different. Reluctantly, Professor Mohan accepted the receiver Carrie handed him. Is this a good time to talk? I don't have much time, so let's keep it brief. We'd like you to provide a briefing. There are people who want to hear your explanation. I don't have time right now. Can't it wait until later? I'm saying this because there's no time. It's very important. Despite being declined several times, Kong Jin-ho earnestly requested. I really hope you can do this. Eventually, Professor Mohan reluctantly agreed. Fine. Thank you. I'll send you the plane ticket right away. What? A plane? Wasn't it supposed to be coming here? But the call had already ended. I met Professor Mohan and Carrie at Washington National Airport with Taikyu. It was the second time since we met at California Institute of Technology. Professor Mohan came with his hands full of luggage. Carrie also had a lot of bags, starting with her laptop case. Isn't it heavy? In response to my question, Carrie said nonchalantly, it's not a problem. When I go out to the field with the professor, I have even more luggage. I guess not everyone can do earthquake research. Just get in for now. We all climbed into the limousine. Have you eaten? Professor Mohan nodded. I had in-flight meals. The food was excellent, he said. I also had a glass of wine. I've always flown economy, but this is my first time in first class. It was amazing, Carrie added. Thanks to that, we had a comfortable trip. I smiled. That's a relief. I was originally going to the hotel before moving, but the schedule got moved up a bit. It's fine if we go straight to the meeting place, right? Professor Mohan nodded and replied, got it. But where are we going? The White House. At my words, he blinked in surprise. The White House. What's the occasion? President Ronald is waiting for us. The two were taken aback. What does that mean? I mentioned that someone wants to hear the professor's explanation. But you never said it was the president, did you? Oh, did I not mention that? The truth is I deliberately left it out. Still, since they were asked to come to Washington, D.C., I thought they'd have some idea. Professor Mohan, looking pale, stammered, no way. You expect me to give a briefing in front of the president. You can just do it as you would in a lecture. But I'm a member of the Democratic Party. Taikyu asked, does that matter? Seeing him unable to answer indicates it probably doesn't matter. Professor Mohan looked uncertain about whether to jump out of the car. But before he could make a decision, we arrived at the White House. We underwent various security checks by the guards. Professor Mohan and Carrie opened their luggage and powered on all electronic devices like laptops. After the security check was completed, we were guided to a room by the staff. A short while later, a formally dressed white woman entered holding documents. This is a non-disclosure agreement. The fact that you're here and everything discussed today is confidential, and any breach will result in penalties. This wasn't just a simple warning. The reason for conducting it in secrecy is that just meeting could give the impression that the administration is seriously considering the big one's potential. Given that California was already in turmoil, unnecessary confusion could escalate the situation. We each signed the documents. The people entering the conference room were determined to be me and Professor Mohan. Carrie opened her laptop and checked the materials once again. Just pull up the PPT and slide it over, I said. I'll handle that. Professor, please focus on the presentation, she replied as I took the laptop from her. Following the staff's guidance, we passed through a narrow hallway toward the conference room. As soon as we entered, it was like a scene straight out of an American drama or news program. In the middle of the cramped conference room was a rectangular table, surrounded by about a dozen people. The first person I noticed was Vice President Mike Bauer. His snowy white short hair and sharp gaze had left a strong impression on me since I saw him at the inauguration. The rest of the faces were all familiar, having seen them multiple times on the news. Secretary of State Jonathan Anderson, Secretary of Defense Patrick Marshall, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Colin Pratt, Director of National Intelligence Simon Simpkins, CIA Director Jack Mitchell, Advisor Ian Creel, and so on. And at the innermost part of the room sat President Ronald, arms crossed. All the top power holders leading America were gathered in one place. While this wasn't an official NSC, National Security Council, meeting, it was essentially the NSC. I could hardly believe I was in this room. What would my mother say if she knew? I tried not to show my nervousness as I glanced at Professor Mohan. He was shaking his legs, looking quite distressed. Ronald, still with arms crossed, said, "Let's begin the briefing." Currently, California is engulfed in anxiety, with media continuously calling experts to discuss the possibility of an earthquake. If Professor Mohan had made his claims alone, it wouldn't have caught much attention. Anyone can make claims. However, putting money on it is not something just anyone can do. I was willing to bet, which strengthened Professor Mohan's argument. If a major earthquake is imminent, we need to prepare measures. If not, we must stop the spread of rumors. Thus, Ronald has summoned us to the White House to hear directly from us. I connected my laptop to the TV and launched a PowerPoint presentation. Professor Mohan started explaining with a trembling voice. Everyone knows that San Francisco is at risk of earthquakes. I turned the PowerPoint slide as directed by Professor Mohan. On April 18, 1906, a magnitude 8.3 earthquake occurred, causing over 3,000 casualties. Then on October 17, 1989, a 6.9 quake resulted in 63 deaths and 3,700 injuries. However, the big one will be incomparable to the previous two earthquakes. Advisor Creel posed a question. Don't other experts disagree? Everyone claims there's no risk of an earthquake. Professor Mohan nodded. That's true when only considering the San Andreas Fault. The fault stretches for 800 miles, and for an M9.0 earthquake to occur. His explanation was lengthy, but in essence the fault length is too short to trigger a major earthquake. However, he discussed the expansion of the Hayward Fault, raising the possibility of earthquakes occurring simultaneously on both faults. Strike-slip faults, reverse faults, transform boundaries, convergent boundaries, and strike-slip, all of it followed in complicated explanations, which were hard to comprehend, but the conclusion was simple. The big one is coming. Vice President Bauer asked. To what magnitude are you referring? Before coming here I kept simulating it. From my estimates, it would be above M9.5. For reference, the Great East Japan earthquake was M9.1. So, a quake stronger than that is expected to hit the San Francisco area. If we compare the cycles of the two fault lines, the probability is highest for the end of September. If a big one hits in this situation, casualties will exceed 1 million. Silence lingered in the conference room for a while. After a moment, Secretary of State Anderson asked incredulously, "Is it even possible to have over 1 million casualties?" Professor Mohan responded calmly, "The Great Kanto earthquake in 1923 had about 140,000 deaths. The 2010 Haiti earthquake had around 300,000, the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake about 20,000, and the 2015 Nepal earthquake around 30,000. Are there any places with more high-rise buildings and higher population density than San Francisco? The capital of California is Sacramento. However, even Americans first think of LA, San Francisco, and Silicon Valley when mentioning famous Californian cities. If a magnitude earthquake strong enough to collapse designed high-rise buildings occurs in that area, 1 million casualties is not exaggerated. So what should we do? Professor Mohan categorized the danger zones into 3 areas. First, the area around San Francisco and Silicon Valley is Area 1. Oakland, San Leandro, and Fremont across the San Francisco Bay, along the Hayward Fault, is Area 2, and the outer cities and surrounding coastline make up Area 3. We need to declare San Francisco and Silicon Valley as disaster zones and evacuate all residents. Vice President Bauer asked incredulously, "Are you suggesting we forcibly drag residents away? How many would obey if told to abandon their homes and flee?" Though his tone was sarcastic, Professor Mohan explained calmly, "First, we must close all government offices and schools. We need to force businesses and stores to halt operations and move residents to evacuation centers. No matter how much you evacuate, it's impossible to evacuate the entire city. And resident evacuation is limited to A1. We need to establish immediate rescue measures for areas A2 and A3 in case of a disaster. Civil, military, and private sectors must cooperate to prepare. We should move available rescue personnel, medical resources, and all assets to California, and deploy federal and state National Guard forces." Everyone was left speechless at the suggestion of moving the military. But that's not the end. This alone is insufficient. We must secure civilian rescuers and requisition all necessary supplies and equipment for rescue operations. It's easy to talk. However, executing any of this is far from simple. Advisor Creel asked, "Do you even know how much economic loss this would cause?" He probably doesn't, since he proposed it. The truth is, Mr. Mohan can strongly advocate for this approach because he is a seismologist, not an economist. He doesn't place much importance on the chaos and economic loss due to evacuation. His sole concern is the loss of life from the earthquake. However, from the perspective of national operators, this is not the case. They must first consider the economic and political losses due to evacuation. Losses are categorized into those caused by action and those caused by inaction. Losses caused by action arise from taking certain actions, while losses caused by inaction arise from not taking any action. People are much more sensitive to losses caused by action. This is why they often can't bear to sell plummeting stocks. They can tolerate the losses from not selling, but the losses incurred from selling a stock that then rebounds are hard to bear. Nevertheless, if an earthquake is certain, evacuation seems inevitable. Evacuating would likely reduce losses compared to remaining in place during an earthquake. However, while the losses from evacuation are 100% certain, the likelihood of an earthquake occurring remains uncertain. This means having to pay for certain losses to avoid uncertain losses. The San Francisco and Silicon Valley areas are among the most productive in the U.S., alongside Wall Street. Closing and evacuating that region would deal a tremendous blow to the U.S. economy. Vice President Bauer looked at me and spoke sarcastically. "North Korea has nuclear warheads and missiles that can strike Seoul at any time, and they're even threatening to fire them. So why aren't you advising the South Korean president to evacuate the citizens of Seoul, but instead are doing this here?" As he said, North Korea has been escalating tensions with daily threats of nuclear attacks and devastation. South Koreans are mostly hardened to these threats and don't pay much attention. However, foreigners do not share that sentiment. Some performances by visiting artists have been cancelled or postponed, and several countries have advised against traveling to Korea. Everyone's gaze turned toward me. Feeling a rush of nervousness, I calmly replied, "We can prevent a nuclear missile from being fired by North Korea, but we have no way to stop an earthquake. The only solution is to be prepared in advance." Vice President Bauer smirked. "So that's why you've been hoarding raw materials. I suppose you haven't heard that we're also stockpiling disaster and relief supplies. If nothing happens, those will just become trash." Though I hadn't intended to, my tone turned sarcastic. Bauer frowned but couldn't refute my statement. "It is true that raw material prices have skyrocketed recently. But that's only because I've been purchasing them. Once I start reselling, the prices will inevitably drop again and I might struggle to recoup my initial cost. Subtracting the money spent on disaster and relief supplies will definitely result in a loss. Of course, the media doesn't mention any of that, simply labeling it as speculation. It's easier for both writers and readers to think that way." The hour-long briefing concluded. Ronald, who had been sitting with his arms crossed in silence since the beginning, nodded and said, "I heard you well. That will be all." We stepped outside. As the conference room door closed, Professor Mohan let out a suppressed sigh. Then in a trembling voice he asked me, "Did I make a mistake?" "You did well. Just by informing the federal government about the risk of a major earthquake, it was a significant achievement." When we returned to the waiting room, Taikyu yawned and asked, "What did they say?" "I still don't know." "How long did we wait?" A staff member came in and said to me, "Please follow me." Just me. I was called back to the conference room alone. Had the others returned to their positions? Only Ronald and Vice President Bauer remained. Neither looked particularly pleased. Ronald spoke up, "We'll raise the alert level for earthquakes and consider evacuation drills." I shook my head. "That's not enough. You need to establish more certain measures." Vice President Bauer shot me a sharp look. "Are you dismissing the U.S. government? You seem to be misunderstanding your position. Perhaps it's best to keep it that way. You should realize that tolerating your actions until now has required great patience. We'll take the necessary actions so you can return to Korea now." Vice President Bauer stood up first. As he left, he lightly tapped my shoulder and said, "If you take any further actions that escalate the issues, you'd better be prepared." Ronald did not say much about Vice President Bauer's warning. His thoughts were likely similar. I said to Ronald, "What will you do if a major earthquake actually occurs?" He retorted, "What if it doesn't happen? You'll just waste some money and that's it. But someone has to take responsibility for the political and economic losses. That responsibility, of course, falls to him as president." Ronald looked completely exhausted. "If you've been watching the news, you know how the political landscape is right now. He was elected by criticizing the weakness of former presidents and promoting a strong leader image. However, nothing was actually going well. North Korea was threatening to launch nuclear missiles at South Korea and the U.S. The U.S.-China trade conflict was escalating, and there seemed to be no resolution in sight for the Syrian crisis. The ambitious policies he pushed for failed to pass Congress. The Russia scandal that surfaced early in his term continued to haunt him, and recently a sex scandal broke out. Women he had affairs with revealed the truth to the press. As seen in the Lewinsky scandal, Americans tend to be forgiving about personal privacy. The decline in public opinion and risk of impeachment for President Clinton were due to perjury and obstruction of justice, not the affair itself. However, in a situation where his approval rating was already dropping, the eruption of a sex scandal was certainly a bad omen. CNN and NBC, known for their strained relationship with Ronald, criticized him harshly. While the affair itself was a problem, they emphasized the attempt to silence the women with money. Why did he even cheat? Less than a year into his term, his approval rating had already dropped to 25%. Considering this is just the first year and not even the end of his term, it's the worst report card. While there are still some loyal supporters left, it's uncertain how long that will last. As of now, Ronald is even undermining the Republican approval ratings. There are whispers within the party that we can't guarantee the midterm elections, and there are even movements considering collective resignations. He is truly suffering from all kinds of political misfortunes. Honestly, I don't understand. What exactly is your reason for this? Is it for profit? Or did you really experience an earthquake and go insane? I answered briefly. Because it's the right thing to do. The right thing to do. Ronald smiled bitterly. Do you remember when you first met me, you offered to exchange a blank check for cash? Yes. I turned his promise into reality and he became president. Well, then you understand. A blank check is useless in politics. If you want to persuade me, bring cash. Are you asking for solid evidence? The only evidence I have is Professor Mohan's argument. I can't speak of premonitions. Even if I did, he wouldn't believe it. I had somewhat anticipated this, but now that it has come to this, it felt bittersweet. I sighed inwardly and nodded. I understand what you're saying. When I returned to the waiting room, Professor Mohan sprang up and asked, "What did the president say?" I relayed Ronald's words. Professor Mohan seemed disheartened and Carrie tried to console him. Still, it's fortunate that he said he's considering a disaster drill. Professor Mohan and Carrie returned to California Tech, while we moved on to San Francisco. Given the negative public opinion about us as soon as we exited the airport, we jumped into the security cars and went straight to the hotel. We didn't step outside at all. Taekyu asked, "Are you really going to do it?" I looked out the window. The San Francisco area still appeared calm. Cars filled the roads and people moved about busily. Yeah. We need to make Ronald act. Time passed relentlessly. A container ship carrying disaster relief supplies and aid products produced in China arrived at the San Francisco port. Electronic equipment sent from Sozong Electronics factory in Vietnam also began to arrive. These items were set to be stored in a rented warehouse. While the initial production volumes could be transported by ship, later quantities would need to be flown in. We continued to stay at a hotel in Silicon Valley, receiving updates about the company's situation and closely monitoring movements from the U.S. government. A week had passed since the briefings from the White House, but there had been no announcement regarding evacuation drills. It was likely dismissed due to concerns it could spread anxiety about earthquakes. Vice President Bauer said in a Fox News interview, "As someone from Hawaii, I've heard countless times since childhood that the Kilauea volcano would erupt. But nothing has happened so far, right?" The USGS U.S. Geological Survey is carefully reviewing all data and consulting with academia, and they've confirmed that the likelihood of a big one is extremely close to zero. Even if a small earthquake were to occur, both the federal and state governments are preparing all necessary measures. I urge the media to refrain from fueling anxiety with their articles and to trust in the government's announcements. We will thoroughly investigate and take strict actions against those spreading rumors or false information that incite public unrest for personal gain. It was essentially a warning for me to keep quiet. The media also pointed this out. One good thing was that Professor Mohan seemed to have more confidence than before. If he had succumbed to worsening public opinion and retracted his claims, the situation would have become more complicated. I received a call from Hyunju. "You've done enough. It's too dangerous now. Do you know what the situation is like?" Yes. As the likelihood of the big one was denied, public opinion continued to worsen. Stepping outside the hotel now, it wouldn't be surprising to have rotten tomatoes thrown at me. Hurry back to Korea with Taekyu. Next I spoke with my mother. "Your name keeps coming up on the news lately. What in the world are you doing there? Are you trying to worry your mom?" "I'm sorry." After enduring a long lecture and finally getting a break, I received a call from an unknown number. "Hello." The caller was none other than Professor Mohan. I turned off my phone for a moment because calls were pouring in. "This is Carrie's phone." The professor spoke urgently. "Oh. More importantly, I just discovered something crucial." "What is it?" "There's a high possibility of an earthquake occurring in Mexico City before big one arrives. You can consider it a precursor." "How likely is it?" "As of now, it's over 80%. "I see." I nodded absent-mindedly, and at that moment something flashed before me. Mexico City earthquake. Another earthquake? South America too is part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, so earthquakes occur frequently. The 2015 Chile earthquake is a prime example. Why are you silent? Can you hear me? I snapped back to reality. What's the magnitude? It's expected to be around M7.0. Compared to the big one, it won't even be 1/50th. Still, is it considered a major earthquake? Then how severe is the big one? Understood. Please contact me if you discover anything new. As soon as the call ended, Taekyu asked, "What did you see this time?" "There will be another earthquake before the big one arrives." "What?" As expected, though I couldn't determine the timing or scale, Professor Mohan had clearly stated that it was a precursor to the big one. "Is there a way to utilize this information?" I called Ellie. "I have something to ask you." 3 days later, I requested an emergency press conference. The venue was the hall on the second floor of the hotel where we were staying. "Is the paperwork you asked for ready?" "Just sent it." I turned on my computer. "I checked it." Ellie asked with a worried tone. "Are you really going to do this?" "I can't think of a better way right now. Doing the right thing requires great courage." "You didn't tell Hyunju, did you?" "Of course not. If she found out, she might come right over and try to talk me out of it. If she learns later, we'll both be in big trouble." Ellie asked me, "Did you intend to do this from the start?" I had previously asked her if she would be okay with losing everything. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not saying it first and for asking you for this paperwork." Ellie replied in a deliberately cheerful voice. "It's fine. I don't know much about earthquakes and I don't understand why you're going this far, but I believe in your sincerity." "Thank you." I didn't realize how empowering it could be to have someone believe in me. Ellie said playfully. There must be better words than just saying thank you. I plan to say it in person. I'll be looking forward to it. After the call ended, I printed the documents that Ellie sent. I looked at Taikyu and said, "You don't have to do this too." "What do you mean? If we're going to do it, we should go all out." "Where do I sign?" I signed first and then Taikyu grabbed a pen. Without any hesitation he signed. "Anyway, an earthquake is going to happen. But what if things go wrong? It's okay. I have my sister. Even just a 3% share from her will be enough for me to live comfortably." Ah. Could it be that he knew it would come to this and gave his sister a portion of his share? Taikyu placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "Sometimes I might give you some pocket money, my friend." Get lost. Well, even if I said that, I felt somewhat reassured. There are plenty of people willing to take care of me, so I don't think I need to worry about starving in the future. I looked at the watch Ellie gave me. It's time. I'll be back soon. Have a good trip. The press conference room was already crowded with numerous journalists. Major American media outlets such as CNN, NBC, and Fox News, as well as local newspapers, were present. When I announced the press conference, I didn't expect so many media outlets to gather. It made me feel quite successful. As soon as I entered, a barrage of cameras was aimed at me. I took my seat and said, "The purpose of this press conference is to warn about the dangers of Big One. The scale of Big One is beyond what you can imagine. The federal and state governments must immediately establish evacuation plans and rescue measures for residents." I communicated the strategies established by Professor Mohan, who divided the affected areas into A1, A2, and A3, directly to the media. Everyone looked astonished. "Are there any questions?" As soon as I finished speaking, the journalists bombarded me with questions. "I received information that you were in a coma for a week after the last earthquake. Is that true? Have you undergone an assessment from a psychiatrist? What do you think about the rumors that you are spreading false information for personal gain? Do you truly not have such intentions?" Suddenly the atmosphere felt like a hearing. Nobody believed in the possibility of Big One. Thus, there were only two reasons for me to be speaking like this. I was either mad or had another agenda. That's why they were treating me like a lunatic or a speculator. In this situation, no matter how hard I tried to explain, it would simply sound like an excuse. First of all, I am perfectly sane. I know there are misunderstandings. I want to clearly state that I have not invested for personal gain, nor do I plan to resell and make a profit. The reporters shouted in unison. "How can we believe that? Have you ever engaged in derivatives trading under a pseudonym? Do you intend to transparently disclose the transaction history?" I anticipated some criticism regarding the investment. Nevertheless, it's absurd if investors foresee a crisis but still refrain from investing. Indeed, hedge fund operator Michael Burry of Scion Capital predicted the U.S. real estate crisis, made investments and earned significant profits. Even the investors who funded his fund before the crisis broke out did not believe his claims. I firmly believe in Professor Mohan's words. A major earthquake will occur in Mexico City in mid-September. This can be seen as a precursor to the Big One. By the end of September, the Big One will arrive. The reporters erupted in unison. What is the basis for that? Are you denying the government's assertion that the Big One is impossible? Can you prove here that it's not just for speculative purposes? If I don't stake everything, who will believe me? I took out the documents I had brought. "I will deposit the entire stake of me and Vice President with the state government of California. If nothing happens by the end of September, 97% of OTK Company's shares will belong to the state government of California." The room fell into silence in an instant. I looked at them and asked, "Does anyone still think I'm crazy or that I'm trying to profit from speculation?" The reporters, who had just been throwing disguised accusations, were left speechless, their faces filled with surprise. I looked directly into the camera and said, "The Big One is sure to come." After the press conference, we sent the deposit documents to the court, notarized by the lawyer. There's no turning back now. If Big One doesn't come by September, we'll both be broke. At least the hundreds of millions I've accumulated through dividends and salaries, along with the house I live in, will remain, so that's some relief, right? Calls were pouring in from all directions. Chase Southwell, Warren Buffett, Chairman Im Jin-young, Senior Sang Yip, subsidiary executives and more. They all asked why I made such a choice, and I repeated what I had said at the press conference. It's because Big One will come and I'm telling them to get ready. If just a few of them would believe me, it would be a huge help. While I was receiving calls from various places, Taekyu also answered Hyunju's call. Just looking at his expression, I could tell how badly he was crushed. After the call, Taekyu said, choking up, "I feel like there's blood coming from my ears." "Yeah. You're fine." It might be best to avoid answering Hyunju's calls for a while. After receiving dozens of calls and finally catching a breath, the hotel phone rang this time. Who could be visiting? I picked up the receiver. "Hello." The other party spoke in a shouting tone. "What are you trying to do right now?" Finally, I received a call. I had been waiting. "I see you watched the press conference. Every American must have seen it. What on earth were you thinking by holding that press conference? Was my warning a joke?" I spoke calmly. "Didn't you ask me to bring cash instead of a promissory note? How much is OTK company worth? No matter how low you estimate, it's over $100 billion. I've staked everything on Big One coming. This is solid evidence supporting Professor Mohan's claims, and it's cash I can show you." He asked, seemingly incredulous. "Are you really crazy?" Now the ball is in the Ronald administration's court. If they were unaware before, now that they know, they must take some action. If damage occurs from an earthquake, they will have to bear political responsibility. If they went through the chaos of evacuation and an earthquake doesn't happen, they will still bear political responsibility. Ultimately, they find themselves in a position of weighing those two outcomes. I asked Ronald. Now there's only 1 month left. What will the president do? The situation changed rapidly after the press conference. It was inconceivable for anyone to stay in San Francisco believing in Big One's potential. Some began leaving San Francisco and Silicon Valley first. A few companies also joined the exodus. It became difficult to find large trucks and moving vehicles. Emergency supplies like food, bottled water, and medical kits were flying off the shelves. Walmart's aisles were empty, and many items on the largest online shopping platform, AMZ, showed sold out. Conversely, the complaints from residents who remained in the area erupted. Who would be pleased hearing about an imminent earthquake after buying an apartment with a lifetime of savings? Real estate prices in San Francisco and Silicon Valley had soared alongside the economic recovery and growth of IT companies. Yet all those transactions vanished in an instant. Multiple significant sales contracts fell through, and planned developments were postponed. Construction companies building in the city faced dilemmas. The financial market also plunged into shock. Stocks of IT companies with headquarters or operations in Silicon Valley plummeted, and unrelated stocks fell due to fears of an economic slowdown. The chaos spread beyond California, reaching the entire United States and the world. Washington's political scene is in chaos. The White House and Congress are engaged in intense debates over Big One. There were discussions about bringing in Professor Mohan and Kong Jin-Hu for a hearing, but this idea was dismissed due to the risk of spreading further anxiety. Academics, led by Professor Josh Brown, again forcefully countered Professor Mohan's claims. The possibility of Big One arriving is absolutely non-existent, and since Mexico is also on the ring of fire, earthquake risks have been raised for a long time, but it is far more likely to occur in southern Mexico rather than in the central area where Mexico City is located. Some journalists published sensational articles suggesting that OTK company is secretly selling disaster supplies they had previously stockpiled or buying shares in related companies to make profits. White House spokesperson Catherine Gennaro held a press briefing. "We will conduct evacuation and firefighting training in the San Francisco Bay Area in consultation with the California state government." In response to subsequent reporters' questions, she emphasized multiple times that the possibility of Big One is non-existent, but stated that the purpose is to calm residents' anxieties and prepare for other disaster situations such as fires. The fallout reached Mexico as well. The Mexican government, wary of public opinion, decided to conduct evacuation drills in Mexico City. After the press conference, public sentiment deteriorated severely. Previously, we were worried about rotten tomatoes being thrown in the streets, but now we are concerned about getting shot. We checked out in secret and moved to a hotel with better security and protection, guided by our bodyguards. I spoke to Daryl. There's a boycott against buying Keros's new cars on the internet, and people are flooding the company with protest calls. Staff morale is quite low. There's not much we can do for now. It's an issue that will resolve itself over time. He asked the question he had posed several times before. Is Big One really coming? If I was not sure, I wouldn't have bet my entire fortune on it. I understand. The voice still sounded uncertain. It wasn't just Keros. Other subsidiaries were also in a state of emergency. At least the B2B companies were faring a bit better, but there was no avoiding immediate revenue hits for the B2C firms. Facet, too, saw a decline in subscribers as cancellations surged. Given the chaos that had unfolded, it was clear I wouldn't escape unscathed. Having arrived at the new hotel, we unpacked our bags. Taekyu turned on the TV. Days had passed since the press conference, yet the confusion was only escalating. News channels featured various experts passionately sharing their views. Speculation flooded the raw materials market, causing prices to skyrocket once again. Gold, a typical safe haven asset, continuously set new record highs, and oil prices surged significantly. In the real estate market, properties were launched at prices over 20% lower than their peak. Real estate experts were claiming it was the perfect time to buy, and indeed major investors and real estate funds began purchasing distressed properties. While value and price may show temporary discrepancies, they ultimately returned to their rightful places. The drop in prices stemmed from concerns over Big One. Once those fears dissipated, prices would likely recover. Of course, that holds true only if Big One doesn't materialize. Self-proclaimed investment experts joined the fray, criticizing OTK companies' investment strategies during this turbulent period. Time magazine published an article comparing me to Nicholas Leeson or John Meriwether. Taekyu blinked in surprise. What does that mean? It means something very bad. Nicholas Leeson was responsible for the bankruptcy of the 200-year-old British institution Barings Bank, while John Meriwether caused astronomical losses due to mismanagement at long-term capital management, prompting intervention from the Federal Reserve. In short, both are infamous financial geniuses who have inflicted harm on the global economy. I wonder if I should consider it an honor to be compared to these two. In a CNN interview, Alan Everhart seemed determined to lash out. Kong Jin, who is completely insane. It's terrifying that such a lunatic is delving into artificial intelligence and autonomous driving. If I ever run into that bastard, I'll punch him right in the face. Taekyu, who was watching the news, asked, "Why is that guy throwing a fit?" Because it's worth throwing a fit. Unlike other car companies gathered in Detroit, Tesla has its headquarters in Silicon Valley and its manufacturing plant nearby. Its battery factory, however, is across the state line in Nevada. As a result, it was seen as the company that would suffer the most if the Big One hit. Their stock price had already been falling as Keros emerged as a competitor, and warnings about the Big One were like pouring gasoline on a fire. Tesla's stock plummeted repeatedly, and the yield on 3-year bonds soared to 12%. At this rate, it was at junk bond levels. Currently, the Model T can't escape production hell, and their cash reserves are running low, necessitating additional funding, making stock sales or bond issuance incredibly difficult. Naturally, frustration was bound to spill over. I'm just sorry for unintentionally causing harm. However, the real place that suffered serious damage was elsewhere. Typically, when a crisis erupts, countries see their currencies depreciate. However, the United States, as a hegemonic and reserve currency country, is an exception. Even during the financial crisis, it was the US that caused the mess, but the actual damage was borne by emerging countries. This time it was the same. When a crisis was predicted in the US, the dollar strengthened while the currencies of emerging countries plummeted. However, currencies like the yen and the pound, considered quasi-reserve currencies and safe assets, showed strength against the dollar. Compared to the weakness of emerging currencies, they were extremely strong. Naturally, exports couldn't fare well. Japan and the UK, both hit by the aftermath of Brexit, were furious. Their media treated me like a complete villain. When compared to the costs arising from the confusion, my pledged shares in OTK company seemed laughably insignificant. In contrast to Japan, which is groaning under the yen's rise, South Korea is in turmoil due to the high exchange rate. With an export-led economy and a high proportion of foreign capital, South Korea had long been known as a global ATM. As the global market teetered, foreign investors began pulling their money out of the Korean market. Stock prices fell and the exchange rate skyrocketed. The exchange rate, which was 1,091 for $1, soared to 1,281 in just a few days. Some predicted it could rise to 1,501, and screams of panic erupted in forex dealer rooms. President Park Si-hyung convened an emergency meeting. The heads of economic ministries, along with the Bank of Korea governor and the head of the Foreign Exchange Bank, gathered at the Blue House. OTK Company's headquarters was overwhelmed with complaints pouring in from around the world, nearly paralyzing operations. This was a decision made arbitrarily by the CEO, and until the press conference no one in the company knew about it. While the CEO initiated the crisis, it was up to the employees to manage the fallout. The head of PR, Young Jae-hong, frantically asked as he hung up the phone. "What's going on? What is CEO Kang Jin-hoo thinking? If things go wrong, the CEO and major shareholder of OTK Company could end up as the state government of California." Park Sang-yeop shouted in despair. "I don't know, damn it." His lifestyle of driving supercars and dating women was over. For the time being he would have to run around to resolve the crisis. Henry checked and implemented Kang Jin-hoo's directives. He received real-time updates on production from the factories in China, Vietnam and Thailand, and monitored the departure and arrival dates of container ships. In the midst of the chaos, a customer approached him. Grand Dayton Hotel, top floor. In a separately designated VIP room, an elderly man in a suit was sitting. He kindly spoke as he looked at Henry. "It's been a while, Henry." Henry greeted him and replied, "What brings you here?" "Haha, a grandfather has no special reason to visit his grandson, does he?" The financial markets were in turmoil and global investment banks were in a state of emergency. Yet in such a situation the CEO of Golden Gate secretly came to Korea. "How is Korea? Are you managing well?" "Yes, I've adapted now." James poured whiskey over ice and slowly got to the point. "The financial market is in chaos due to CEO Kang Jin-hoo. Out of nowhere a big one is coming. The market's rapid fluctuations present both a crisis and an opportunity. We need to start moving at Golden Gate, but first I'd like to hear your opinion. What do you think about this matter?" Henry struggled to respond. If it were merely a question for opinions, a phone call would suffice. There must be a reason for him to ask in person. Henry was James's direct grandson. However, if he knew his grandfather, he would never pass on the family legacy to someone incompetent. The Goldman family had maintained wealth and power for hundreds of years. This was possible not because of blood but because they continued the family name. James C. Goldman. Originally, his name was Clark and his father was a distant relative of the Goldman family. However, the head of the Goldman family, recognizing him, adopted him despite having 3 sons. The name James was given to him at that time. In the end, James inherited the Goldman family and Golden Gate, surpassing his 3 biological sons. Those who lost in the competition for succession had to leave the family with only $5 million each. Considering the value of money at the time, it was still a considerable amount. Of course, compared to the Goldman family's assets, it was merely a drop in the bucket. 2 lived fairly wealthy lives while one lost all his fortune during the dot-com bubble and ended his life. Meanwhile, James grew Golden Gate into the world's largest IB, multiplying the family's wealth several times. Henry had reviewed all related papers and academic claims after being instructed by Kang Jin-hoo. Almost everyone denied the possibility of Big One. If one thinks logically and rationally, it's merely a concern. Even with supercomputers and artificial intelligence, nothing can predict tomorrow's weather with 100% accuracy. Just as the flapping of a butterfly in Brazil can cause a tornado in Texas, everything can change with a single minor variable. Disaster prediction is ultimately a matter of probability. Nothing can be 100%. So what did Kang Jin-hoo believe in to gamble everything on Big One coming in September? As Henry pondered, James muttered, "You're smart and rational. But the market doesn't move solely on reason. To deal with the market, something more is required." While he followed his grandfather's commands, he couldn't easily understand when he first heard about going to OTK Company. It was true that Kang Jin-hoo had achieved great success. However, he was just a young man in his early 20s who hadn't even graduated from college. What was it that he expected to learn from him? Henry recalled the images of Kong Jin who he had seen. This was not only a question of whether Big One would come but also whether Kong Jin who was right or wrong. As he contemplated, the answer became clear. If that's the case. Henry raised his head and said, Big One will come. Golden Gate must prepare. Do you really think so? Yes. A moment later, James smiled broadly. What you lack is the intuition that goes beyond reason and the guts to trust it. Seeing you now, I think sending you to Korea was the right choice. James handed a glass to his grandson. Of course, whether that's right or not is a completely different question. Let's watch and see if you're worthy of inheriting the family legacy. Financial firms have reduced their trading in derivatives and issuing options on their own. This is a precaution against extreme situations like the 9/11 terrorist attacks or Brexit. However, most famous investment banks such as JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and Merrill Lynch have bet that the Big One will not come. They sold off commodity futures and purchased plummeting tech stocks and real estate in the San Francisco area. In contrast, Golden Gate moved very differently. They took short positions in the stock and bond markets while increasing their holdings in gold and cash. They sold off tech, consumer goods, and financial stocks and bought shares in construction, steel, heavy machinery, and infrastructure. They were essentially aligning themselves with OTK Company. Warren Buffett, arguably the biggest player in the market, remained quiet without any significant movements. He refrained from buying or selling immediately and did not respond to media interviews. In the San Francisco Bay Area, evacuation drills and firefighting rescue training based on disaster scenarios were conducted. Sirens sounded in the city center, police controlled the traffic, and people working in high-rise buildings orderly exited to evacuation centers. Firefighting and rescue helicopters loudly flew overhead. Meanwhile, time continued to pass. September 8, 4:50 a.m. An M8.1 earthquake struck Mexico. However, the earthquake's epicenter was not in central Mexico City but in the southern state of Chiapas, specifically Pijijayapan. The ground split and buildings collapsed. Reports indicate nearly 100 confirmed fatalities. U.S. media immediately reported the earthquake, flooding news outlets with breaking news. Magnitude 8.1 earthquake strikes Pijijayapan, Mexico. Professor Mohan's prediction goes awry. MIT's Professor Josh Brown, who claimed the Big One would never come, accurately predicted the southern Mexico earthquake. Post-quake claims disproven.